Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about clinical research safety reporting guidelines. This is related to the process that occurs in clinical research, and it has to do, it's related to TMF in the sense that there are documents that results from this, but typically they're handled by clinical science and the team that coordinates this, but this is a component of more of a CTA role versus a TMF role, but it still benefits you on the TMF side to be aware of what happens, and that's the overall goal of Power of Work. Is we want to help people not only become, let's say, TMF document processors, but to go into that role having a full understanding of all the different components of clinical research, so you can just do your job better, but also have an understanding of where you might want your career to grow in. That's one reason why we think TMF is so wonderful, is because it's kind of a great entry point where you get exposure to all the different types of documents, and you get exposure to a lot of people, like especially if you end up working in a more like study liaison role, or you're working with the study teams, or you're just working with the document owners and helping them correct their documents. You get that exposure to so many different people versus kind of being siloed in one group and you just work with your group. You have the ability to have contact with a lot of different departments and a lot of different moving parts that make a clinical trial successful. But if you kind of just focus on the documents and not even the document, but just like your process of the document, then you kind of miss out on a really big picture of how clinical research works. So having a little foundation can help you be more comfortable with it and get ready to enjoy a career in clinical research. So I wanted to go over some terms. We've gone over these in the past before in a variety of different meetings, but I think it's really important to have some baseline knowledge of like regulations and what they are. And that helps you in the sense of any sort of interview, because that's usually like a little bit beyond the TMF scope. And so if you have this knowledge, that can help you become a competitive person in your TMF interviews, because you not only know how to process the documents, but you also know kind of where everything fits in and why we do this, right? So the idea is that we conduct clinical research for the goal of kind of benefiting science and helping people, right? And that's what ICH is, the International Council of Harmonization, and people usually refer to it as GCP ICH E6R2. R2 is the updated version from R1, and we had a separate training just on that. But basically, the idea is to know that this is a global council that is here to try to help organize and kind of like streamline clinical trials, in the sense that making sure that it's safe for everybody. Like it's literally like a protection for the patients, making sure that everyone is doing good clinical practice, which is what GCP stands for. And I do have a link to a GCP training that I highly recommend, that gives you a better understanding of what clinical research is and why you're trying to have good clinical practice to protect the patients, right? So in their definition, the ICH aims to achieve greater harmonization worldwide for the development and approval of safe, effective, and high quality medicines in the most resource efficient manner. And one aspect is that nowadays people are really seeing the benefit of clinical trials and the benefits of new medicines being made. And as a result, they want to make sure that's also resource efficient, that when medicines get made, they don't cost a whole ton, because it's that can be a burden to people. But then also, they're very expensive to run, right? And if there's not funding within clinical research, then people are less likely to make new medicines. So it's a very interesting balance, but trying to make sure that people are doing it in the same kind of way is a little bit more beneficial. And so that's what they mean by resource efficient management. I know the company that I work for, they have a goal where they're trying to produce more medicines at an extreme reduction in the cost. So like, but they're not doing that just saying, oh, we're going to slash our prices, because that's not really feasible. They're saying, how can we think about how can we be more efficient? And here they say effective, but how can we be more efficient in making our medicines? And one thing we've done is like reduce a lot of meeting time, right? And making it streamlined so people can be aware of things, but they don't have to sit in tons of meetings and be kind of like talked at. So trying to really think about, does everyone in this meeting have to be here? Kind of a mindset. And that's just one way they're trying to be resource efficient to help kind of better society. So you can see here that the ICH is not just saying, oh, we're international, but it's just Europe, right? It's a mix of things. So it's Europe, it's United States, and it's also saying Japan. And this is kind of, those are who founded it. I'm sure it has most, most major countries involved. Now, just to learn terminology, the ICH E6 Section 8 is the essential documents. So I think if somebody was to have an interview question for you and you were to say, they were to ask, well, what do you know about different regulations? You could talk about, well, I'm aware of, and I'm familiar with GCP, ICH, E6, R2. So that's like a little phrase I would write down, right? But then they're like, well, tell me, like, what do you know a section, or what do you know about it, right? And so far in our training, we've just gone over the glossary, and we'll dive in deeper. And that's today, we're diving in deeper to the safety aspect. But just some terms to know is that Section 8 is the essential document. So Section 8 is the most related to TMF. And we talked about this before, where it's just a list of minimal documents. So it's not an extensive, these are just what you need to have. This is what the minimum you need to have, plus anything else that helps tell the story of the clinical trial. But that's just kind of a term or something to memorize is ICH E6 Section 8 is your essential document. Okay, and then I have something fun that I learned as I was trying to research for this is I've always heard about 21 CFR, which is a Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21. But what I didn't know, and I might show it to you today, is this is basically a list of regulations with the US, but it covers like everything. And if I looked at it right, like Section 1 is like the president's responsibilities. It was really cool. Like I thought it was just clinical research, but it's basically a code of federal regulations regulating like all aspects of the United States, which I thought was really cool. So Part 314, so these are the two sections that you probably want to eventually know. Part 314 is the application for FDA approval to market a new drug. And we can dive into this a little bit and I'll show you. It's really dry looking. And then 314.8 is post-marketing reporting of adverse drug experiences. So that's what we're talking about today. But then just so you know, when I've really heard about 21 CFR, I've mainly heard about it as in Part 11, which is in regards to electronic records. This is like a newer aspect, electronic records and electronic signatures. And this has to do about how we're collecting signatures for the TMF, because now we're moving more digital, right? We used to be paper documents, and now we're doing a lot of digital documents and scanning documents, and kind of how are we doing electronic signatures and how are they regulated? So those are two things for you to know. The buzzword, the 21 CFR Part 11 is something that's kind of a hot topic in TMF. And then today we're talking more about the safety aspect. Okay, so safety terms is a little bit of a review, but an adverse event means that basically something happened, right? So it's something that you didn't really want to happen, and it had to do with the use of medicine, basically. Whether or not it was actually like confirmed to be related to the drug, something happened, right? So something negative happened, and it wasn't a clinical study. An example could be you have a diabetic patient and he has a heart attack. You don't really know if the heart attack was related to the diabetes or was related to the medicine you're giving him for the diabetes, but in the clinical trial, that was an adverse event. Now, then we have serious adverse event, and that's when it's a more major aspect. And these are, we went over this before, but these are the 5 items. If I was you, I would recommend kind of memorizing. These are the 5 things that can be an SAE, what makes it more serious. So it results in death, it's life-threatening, it requires hospitalization, or if they're already in the hospital, it extends and like their hospitalization. It results in a persistent, significant disability, or it results in a birth defect. So these are the aspects of an SAE. Now, in my experience, the main ones I've seen is right here, the hospitalization. That's usually, that's usually what is result of that, right? So don't be scared. You're not constantly having people dying on you. Matters what study you're working on, but that's typically not typically things are safe and we're just really trying to test the ability to market it, right? And we're monitoring the safety, but it's gone through a lot of rigorous tests to get to that point. And this is something useful to know. And if you're to take away anything from this, you just kind of know that the grades go from 1 to 5, and that 5 is death. This is kind of similar to what we just talked about, but this is the events of an AE, right? So it's a little tricky. It's not, intensity does not equal severity. So these are just the grades, and these grades are on the severity. Sorry, these grades are on the intensity. These are how intense the AE is, but it does not mean that it's an SAE. These are just how you grade an AE. And so we can dive into that a little bit further, but that's what they're showing here is a grade 3 or 4 does not mean for sure that it's an SAE. And so just because it says a grade 3, while it could be because it requires hospitalization, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't instantly mean that it's an SAE. Okay, so this is kind of what we wanted to dive in today. This is just to know the ICH safety reporting. And interesting enough, this is all the ICH has on this. And that's why we'll go into some of the other regulations. It's keeping it pretty high level. And as you'll kind of know, the ICH does that in a sense. They're not, it's, a general term is when you're writing an SOP, you don't want to box yourself into something where you're putting restrictions too hard and then no one can follow them, right? So let's just go over these 3 kind of points that they have. So they're saying all SAEs, right? And we're talking about that serious adverse events should be reported immediately to the sponsor, except for those that are already in the protocol or other documentation, right? So we talked about the investigator's brochure before. That's kind of a big document that goes over all the science and kind of gives the explanation of the study to the doctor. So it's not written in a language that's meant for everybody. So it's kind of, you can think of it as the investigator brochure is written in a term for like the physicians. You should there's going to be more medical terminology in there. And then the protocol is written for everybody who's running the study. So like the study coordinators, everyone should be able to read it and understand it. And then the ICF is written for the patient. So it should be in a very simple, clear language. There should be very limited medical terminology in the ICF in the sense of making sure it's very clear. You don't want to use, bigger words that somebody might not understand. So that's a little bit of the documents. And that's why while we're right now going over safety, it's still related to the TMF in the sense that that there are different documents, and learning more about different parts of the clinical research will help you be a better TMF processor or a CTA because you're aware of all these different documents and how they interplay with each other, right? So basically, if there's something that the sponsor, right, the person who's making the medicine, has already put in the protocol or the IB, it doesn't need immediate reporting. So this can be like if there's, I think they were talking about, let's say with cancer research, there's a certain thing, like let's say like really low laboratory or kind of abnormal lab ranges that in a normal person would be considered like unsafe, but it's known that all these patients already have it, and so you don't want to be issuing all these SAEs because they have this what would be considered an unsafe lab range all the time, basically. And so that in the protocol and the IB, the sponsor might go out and say, okay, here are the different things that we think might happen because it's already because of the patient population. So those are saying that it doesn't have to be. So basically, there might be a list in the protocol or the IB of certain things that might not need to be reported as an SAE because it's already kind of expected. And then, and so this time frame, when a physician knows, like whenever the site is aware of the serious adverse event, they are supposed to report it to the sponsor within 24 hours. And then we'll go in, I think in the next slide, a little bit on the timing of how long the sponsor has to report it. Okay, so this is the first sentence is about, finding out about the SAE, and then the immediate report should follow promptly with detailed written reports, right? So the first one is more like the initial communication. The second sentence is alluding to creating like very specific reports. And we'll see an example. And then the immediate and follow-up reports should identify the subject by unique code numbers, right? So you don't want to give away the subject's name or any sort of thing or address because that will unblind. They're not supposed to know the subjects, right? So they have to be careful about that. And then the investigator should also comply with applicable regulatory requirements related to the reporting of unexpected serious adverse drug reaction to regulatory authorities and the IRB, right? So remember we talked about IRB is usually related to the site, and they are the ones that will, they need to be notified. So they're kind of, you can see them as the people who sit above the, they are kind of like the board that is reviewing and making sure that the study is done appropriately and realistically, mainly with the view on the patient safety, right? They're not, they want to know, I think, if a protocol was deviated and that kind of thing, but they're much more concerned about the patient safety rather than like, oh, are they following the protocol from like the sponsor side? Like, are they following what we want them to do? They care more about, are the patients safe? Okay, oops, sorry about that. And then the second point is adverse events or laboratory abnormalities identified in the protocol as critical to safety evaluations should be reported to the sponsor according to the reporting requirements and within the time period specified by the sponsor in the protocol. So the protocol will say that, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of what like the FDA says. That's what we'll talk about next. For reported deaths, the investigator should supply the sponsor and the IRB IEC with any additional requested information. So they might have autopsy or any additional items that are related to the death. So this is basically what encompasses what the ICH says about safety reporting. So it's pretty high level, right? Because remember, ICH is supposed to be this international, global, this is for everybody. This is not country specific. So yeah, now we'll dive into country specific in the sense of what does the FDA say? The FDA says that the initial reporting, oops, sorry about that. I have a whole bunch of links in here too. So give me 1 second. Not too sure why we're out of. Okay. So initial reporting. So an IND application, which is what we talk about for clinical research trying to run a trial, right? You have an IND application, and the sponsor, the company making the medicine, must report any suspected adverse reactions, or adverse reactions is basically AEs, to study treatments that are both serious and unexpected. Unexpected serious, which you usually talk about like SUSARs, so serious unexpected suspected adverse reaction. So that's a SUSAR, so you'll hear that term. And so they're supposed to report to the FDA as soon as possible, but you have within 15 calendar days. That's not business days, but calendar days to provide an initial summary of the information. Now, unexpected, fatal, or life-threatening has to happen within 7 days. And the idea behind this is that the FDA wants to be notified if something happens, right? So let's say, and again, very hypothetical, I haven't seen this myself, but if there is something where people are reporting all of a sudden, they're doing a certain dose, and now they're upping the dose. That's like the next part of the clinical trial, and they give it to somebody and they get really sick. The FDA wants to know right away, because that helps them, if they think it's serious, that helps them potentially pump the brakes on the study and be like, wait, you guys need to figure out what's going on before more people get sick. And this is especially if there are multiple people. All of a sudden there's multiple SUSARs kind of at the same dose, and they want to basically, the FDA wants to be aware, versus finding out the end of the study or something, right? Months later, they want to be aware right away. So basically, if it is unexpected or life-threatening, it's 7 days. If it's not, then it's 15 days. And then you have follow-up reports. Usually you do these follow-up reports until the patient's better, until they're out of being kind of considered sick, or the adverse event is kind of done. Okay, so this is an example of the safety report form. And then I have it up too, I believe. But this, you can see that this is a very specific form. Right, and you're supposed to fill in all these different aspects of it, and you kind of document it. And so that's that initial slide where the initial communication might come in email or a phone call, or a little note or something, that they tell them right away, and they just need to communicate it however they need to, from the doctor to the sponsor, and that needs to take 24 hours. But then from the sponsor to the FDA, that's supposed to happen within, like we were talking about, either 7 or 15, and it comes in this form. And then so we can see, I think I had it open. But yeah, so we have that form. Let's see what this is. And then this is, I know we're quickly running out of time here, but this is what we talked about, where this is the Code of Federal Regulations. And this is what it looks like. So this is, it's good to poke around this. This is the entirety of 314. So basically, this is the government's guidance on approval to market a new drug. And then so here are all these different parts of it. And then what we talked about was the next section, I believe. Oops. Okay, so here's the form in its entirety. So you can see who reported it. Here are the suspected products. And then it just has kind of some, here's where to send it. But basically, it's just that one main page of just filling in the details. And so it's very streamlined and organized. Okay, then I think here are other, here is the Code of Federal Regulations, and you can see the different sections. And then this next one is, this is specifically on what we talked about, the 15-day, and then and they have the 7-day in there too. But this is basically, this is what it looks like, the exact regulations kind of governing how we manage safety within clinical trials. And so that gives you a good little overview on safety. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts on this?
Not at this time. That was